Marianne, I'm going to be sending you the YouTube link. FYI.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Yeah.
Is Marianne on her microphone? Yet?
I am.
There you are. Okay, just checking.
Bruce, I have to say you have the best artwork.
Thanks, pal. So,
Any history to that guy?
but that's Van Gogh. That's his self-portrait. And that bandage he's got around his head's where he cut his ear off when his boyfriend left him. He was distraught about that and went into some isolation and decided to do a self-portrait. He was quite the unusual guy.
Yeah.
You know, you've seen the Starry Night painting that he's done.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he actually did that when he was in jail. And that was the view looking out his prison window.
Cool.
Go back, it's pretty interesting actually to read about it and understand, exactly what it was. So.
Didn't he die at a young age?
Yeah, actually he did. Yeah. Of course, none of them lived as long as we do now anyway, back in those days. But it was an unusually young age though when he died. I don't remember what age he was when he died. Yeah, have you read that Da Vinci? It's basically it's the latest one out about him. It's really interesting to read that. He hardly finished any of his paintings. I mean, he really didn't finish up very many. That was a big problem that they all had with him because he wouldn't. They'd put him under contract, to do a painting, and it might take him 10 years to do it. And then sometimes they'd have to get after him and, all kind of stuff.
Right.
One thing that I didn't understand about him, he was more of an inventor. He came up with all sorts of different types of philosophies and stuff. Even like some of the technology they use today about the eye and the retina and stuff. He developed a lot of that and understood that, way back then.
Are you talking about Da Vinci?
Yeah, he would take actually cut up a lot of cadavers and stuff, and so he could understand their muscles, their bone structure and stuff. He was an extremely eccentric kind of guy.
I was in Florence and got to go to a lot of museums that were all based on Da Vinci. And he's pretty impressive, kind of a man of our time.
Absolutely. Yeah, he was way out there.
Let me take this opportunity to mute the public. I'll unmute you guys in a second.
All right. Is Frank here?
I don't see Frank.
Okay.
Okay, I sent you prompts to unmute yourself.
Thank you.
Yep.
We good?
Yep.
Hi, Jeremy.
I can unmute myself today. Thank you, Brad.
Yeah.
I just sent you the request, so that's why it worked.
Oh,
Sorry.
so I'm
Sorry
not special tonight. Is what you're saying.
Everybody else ready? I know we're missing Frank.
Frank's here.
Oh, hi, Frank. Okay, good. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a special Village of Tequesta Council Workshop. It is Monday, August 17th, 2020, and it is 6 p.m. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mayor Brennan,
Here.
Vice Mayor Stone,
Here.
Councilmember Brandon,
Here.
Councilmember Diambra,
Here.
Councilmember Prince.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. To help prevent the spread of COVID-19, this workshop is being held remotely using Zoom and YouTube as has been authorized by Governor Ron DeSantis. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. This evening, we have only one item on the workshop. We will take public comments after council has discussed the topic. The clerk will read comment cards before opening the phone lines. If you plan on speaking, please state your name and address for the record. And if you do not plan on speaking, please mute your phones now. Item 1 is a council discussion of fiscal year 2020-2021 budget. And that would be Village Manager Allen.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to share my screen while I'm getting it up. I want to acknowledge our special guest tonight with Hugh Dunkerley and Michelle Glode. If there are questions regarding the budget, they can help me out tonight if need be. Let's see. This. All right. I'm guessing you guys all see my screen.
Yes.
All right. So this is the proposed budget for this year. We have made a few changes since the last workshop, and I'll go over just some of the highlights that we have in this year's budget. We have talked about these, the sand replacement project, Country Club Phase 2. We're going to fund the community center plans and construction this budget year, Northcom operations, Tequesta bridge maintenance, funding for street projects, continued sidewalk repair throughout the village, BLM partnership and patrol, employee compensation, 4% for PBA, IFFF is 3.5, that's the average, CWA is 3.08. The non-union, we do have a 3% proposed increase in this draft budget. We have restored Hurricane Disaster Relief Fund from Dorian. There were some funds that did not get covered by FEMA, and so we were but we replenish those funds to make it $500,000 from water, $500,000 general fund for a total of $1 million. The draft budget changes since the last time we've talked. We removed the non-union 0.33%, removed the non-union one-time payment. We recognize the difference in the budget versus actual and health insurance premium. And this is where we'll get into some of these changes. The health insurance, we typically budget 10%. For the health insurance, that difference came in, or the premium came in at 5.8% increase. It's not technically savings, but it is recognized difference between what was budgeted versus actual. We also recognize the difference in budget versus actual in property and casualty insurance premium. Those were both approved on Thursday at the budget. We decreased the allocated fund balance. We fully funded the leisure services special events. Now, whether that's Tequesta Fest or other community events to help celebrate Tequesta and our close-knit community. And then, as I mentioned just a second ago, non-union employees will receive a 3% increase. That is different from last time. You have a budget summary. I'm not sure how easy it is to come across on the screen, but I do believe I sent you guys an email with a budget summary brochure that we will pass out. Well, last year we passed out at the workshop when we were discussing budget. This year, depending on if we can meet in person for that workshop or if but we will put it out on Facebook and social media so people have an opportunity to see the budget summary as the brochure. Just a kind of a 5-year or 6-year running history of our operating expenses versus personnel. You'll see that we have increased personnel, and this year we have addressed some of the operating expenses that, so there is an increase this year as opposed to in the previous years. Have included the 5-year capital. We've taken a look at this I just wanted to bring to your attention, you will be approving the 5-year capital plan with the budget this year as well. And now we actually have a funding mechanism for that 5-year capital plan. I know it's very important to council for roads, streets, sidewalks, of course, our community center. So we are planning on funding some street projects, some sidewalk projects, and of course the community center. The council has done an excellent job over the past couple of years, or this is a 10-year, of really trying to keep the tax rate flat or level. And so this is just kind of an example or a graph depicting that. The tax rate has stayed relatively low. Just a few budget notes, something to just keep an eye on, or we really need to look at, is that there is some effects of COVID that has on this budget that we're currently in, as well as next and probably the year after that. The COVID expenses, some of the sales tax, property values, I'll go over that in the next slide. I will add that we will try to seek any state and federal reimbursement for COVID. I know you guys passed a resolution through the Florida League of Cities to try to seek some of that CARES Act money. Staff will continue to work to try to get some of that recouped. And I'll go over some of the expenses already. And then a couple of budget notes that I'll touch on: the unassigned fund balance and some of the maintenance renewal equipment that we need to focus on in the coming months and coming years. So the 2020, the current budget we're in, we're estimating right now we're at $182,000 in COVID-related expenses. Some of that will be reimbursable through FEMA, and some of it will not. So we will submit for all of it, and we'll see where we come short. I know a big talk right now is, what's reimbursable and what's not. There's going to be some of our expenses that aren't. And so we'll see what that difference comes out to. But right now, our impacted budget for expenses is $182,000. This 2020 estimated, the state shared revenue, we are estimating a reduction or not recouping $115,000 in revenue. So that's an impact to our budget currently. For 2021, we're estimating a drop in state shared revenue projected by the state of $197,000. And I think I've shared this chart with you guys before. The actual breakdown of what the shortfalls are going to be in this coming year. Also, the note is our building fund fees. We're expecting right now, or we're expecting our expenditures over revenue just because of some of the shortfalls in the building department. That's something to keep an eye on. We don't have to make any changes at current time, but our land use fees are kind of tied to those building permit fees. And at some point we'll have to make an adjustment to those, so that way that fund is self-supporting. So this is the unassigned fund balance. We've talked about it a couple of different times. We did make a change to the building fund, and we were able to go back a few years and recoup some of our admin fees for that. So estimated at the end of this year to be a shortfall of $441,000. That's 16.7% of our 2 months worth of total general fund expenditures. This is the village policy that requires it. So last year, this is what I wanted to point out. Last year, we came up with a plan to allocate money to fund balance every year to try to come out of that shortfall. This year, currently in this draft budget, we don't have any money allocated to fund balance. So we will have to look at that and come up with a strategy in the next few months of really how we're going to recoup that fund balance. And maybe it's through some larger projects, but we do need to look at that. Maybe it's through some savings on special events or things like that. The last slide that I have here is just the 5-year projections, and this is, I've kind of shared this, is we have a very tough year. This year is very tight. I know directors and department heads, they've made a lot of they've scraped the budget as well as they could. But next year we're even anticipating even a lower. We're estimating under $200,000 of being under, and that's with a 3% ad valorem and a 3% personnel cost expenditure. So just something that we're gonna have to, you know, have some conversations about some additional revenue, whether it's annexation, taxes, or, you know, our expenditures. With that, I can answer any questions you have. This is the next steps in the budget approval process. So we have a balanced budget submitted to you guys. And so the next, we're looking at November or September 10th will be the first hearing to adopt the budget.
So Jeremy, the slide you showed on the building department, were the administrative fees that were being shown there, did that reflect any of the chargebacks for the prior years, or is that just for the current year going forward?
I'm gonna let Hugh answer that to make sure, because I don't want to give you the wrong answer, because I would just be guessing. Hugh, do you know if that, the slide that came out earlier, you sent me the 5-year projection that had the building fund, that's where I took that from. Did those represent the chargebacks?
Because you mentioned some recoup that positively affected the reserves. So
Right.
I didn't know if that was separate from what was shown on that one slide. I just wanted to make sure I understood how all the pieces fit together.
That is excluding the $195,000. That only includes the fiscal $250,000 shortfall in permit fees. So at the end of the year, it's going to be an additional $195,000 decrease.
Okay,
He wants to know, Hugh, if that represents that budget balance of 942, the reserve, if that has already subtracted the 195 from that.
No, it's not. That 195 was approved in the Thursday's meeting. We will incorporate that by the end of the fiscal year.
So it's not incorporated yet.
Okay, so all those numbers would be adjusted downward then.
Right. That's right.
All right, so 195 is what we're moving in for from prior years.
Right. Now, I will say that this fund balance here does represent the 195 in there, and that's projected where we'll be at the end of this year.
Yeah, well, that's where you made mention of the uptick in the required fund balance, and that's why I was asking that question. Okay, and we have confirmed with the auditors that the retroactive assessment that we're going to make is completely copacetic, right? There's no issues whatsoever. They're completely on board, and they're completely comfortable with what we're doing.
Yes, and we have an email from them, and you can attest to it or speak more to it, but we do have an email from them.
Okay. I'll trust you. I just want to make sure.
Jeremy, can you go to the 5-year projections or the 5-year estimate chart towards the bottom?
Yeah. That one?
On this one, what are the assumptions taken from year to year with personal increases?
So in like 21, anything that has a union contract tied to it already has those increases built into it. If it doesn't have a union contract tied to it, so like the fire in 2022 does not have anything tied to it. So it's using the personnel cost of 3% at the top, personnel. And so that would be non-union, and fire would be 3%. And I think I've sent you guys a version of this. I mean, the numbers can be played with those assumptions. I mean, you can play with it. It's like a calculator that Michelle did an awesome job putting together, but you can play with those ad valorem. You can play with personnel, play with the operating costs. So in this particular assumption is 3% ad valorem increase and a 3% personnel increase. But
yeah, thank Michelle for that, by the way.
PBA in 2022, and don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure 2022 has a 4% increase. And if Marlene's here, maybe she has it. She has that number. But CWA will have I think a 3.78%. And then now with this assumption is 3% personnel for fire and non-union.
Okay. And Jeremy, you mentioned sources of revenue. So you said annexation obviously is something we're looking at, but that's not factored in here. Nor have we factored in the sea glass project, correct?
Right. We have not factored any major project into any of this. And so that'd be considerations if we want to, hold fast on those and for how long. We did get we do have a policy that says 3 years. We did get a note in our audit this year that says we have till September, because that would be the 3-year period. So while we don't know that we'll get a finding in it, we could be looking at a finding in our audit if we don't address that policy.
Okay.
When you say address the policy, are you recommending we change it and reduce it from 2 months?
Meaning address the policy, meaning we need to get to our 2-month operating reserves, which would be that slide.
How do you think that we're going to be able to get to that, Jeremy? To get to that operating reserve that they're requiring? I mean,
Well,
it looks like maybe the revenue base is potentially going down, with lack of building permits for, don't have any more land really to develop here in the city to speak of. Eventually, it looks like to me that our costs are going to begin to outweigh our income at some point.
Well, I think, there's a complicated answer and a simple answer to that. Obviously there's the easy answer is we could, if sea glass or one of these, the reserve come through as a project, that will help our general fund, because we have the 1% land use fees. And so that could straighten that up if we want to wait on that. Of course, if we, continue down the path with annexation, I know we've had some conversations about it. At some point, we will continue with those conversations. They're kind of on hold because of COVID. That's an avenue. If neither one of those are the avenue that we're going to go or wait on, then there's also, of course, taxes or service charges that we have.
Jeremy, when does the debt roll off and we have those funds to be used?
Well, you see it kind of recognized here. I think it's the end of 22 is the debt service will roll off, and then we'll start to see it actually kind of gets replaced with the debt service. Actually get replaced with a new debt service, but you'll see it in 2023. You'll see. I don't know if you can see my mouse or pointer, but that's the debt service that will be coming off.
So are you showing the cost for that new debt service?
Well, the debt service for the community center will be coming out of the surtax fund. So it'll be coming out of the capital improvement plan, which is the discretionary funds, and the water utility tax will pay for that. So that debt will come off the books for the public safety building, and the new debt will be tagged to the capital improvement plan.
Jeremy, let's talk a little bit about the impact of Tequesta Fest and its ramifications if we don't go forward with it. And I really believe we need to make a decision. But you have left in a full $50-some thousand for other special events, correct?
Right. So we were able to put that back in because of the recognized differences in budget versus actual. And I know there was some concern, and I don't know about concern, but I know there's always a hope that we can do community events. And, I know I miss them as well as everybody else, but so we had those funds, we were able to put those back in there with the hope of Tequesta Fest. But if we don't, we can still have some smaller community events. What size that looks like or what those look like, I mean, that'll depend on, where we are with COVID.
Okay.
But it's very possible that we could have a surplus in that account for this
Right.
particular year, given the circumstances.
I could imagine if we don't have Tequesta Fest that we will not spend all of that money. And so there could be some allocate to fund balance at the end of the year for that.
Okay. Now Seaglass, aren't they under aren't they under a requirement to do something with the permitting by the end of this year?
I'll have to check the timing on that. I know they asked for an extension and the council granted that. I don't know how long we've granted that for, but I will say that being that we're under a declaration of emergency, that if they come and ask for another extension, the extension itself is granted through the state of Florida.
Okay.
However, the fee is what they come to council for and ask for that waiver. But
Okay.
I believe that anytime we're under that declaration, and I would let somebody else clarify or confirm that, but as long as we're under declaration, those can be extended through the governor's office.
Okay, now let me ask you a spin-off on that. I understood, and again, I haven't talked to the folks at Seaglass directly, so I'm getting this secondhand, but I understood that with the deposits that they've received on the units so far, I know Nilsa said they were only a couple of units away from meeting their minimum, but my understanding is that some of those deposits get returned if they don't break ground by year end, or if they haven't taken the next step in the permitting process. Is that accurate?
I've heard that. I'm not sure. I have talked to the developers at Seaglass, and I know they're still very eager to push forward. I mean, obviously they know that in the middle of COVID, but he did confirm that with me about I think they have 4 units that have been pre-leased. Now I don't know their terms about, giving money back or any of that if they're not starting by a certain time. We didn't discuss that.
Yeah, it might be useful just to understand, what their business model is and their obligations are. I mean, obviously, based on the total value of the Seaglass project, the property taxes from those units would amount to probably about $500,000 a year. And if we're looking to plug some holes and we can hold the line on expenses, that obviously would allow us to plug that gap in the reserve requirements. So.
Yeah, depending on when they break
When it's up
ground
and
for
running,
that.
yeah.
I mean, there's always going to be whatever 18-month building process or whatever. So there's going to be a lag of, we'll say 2 years for the lack of being specific, but there'll be a couple of year lag in those revenues for that.
Well, I'm thinking too, in terms of the policy requirement, whether if we have a go forward plan to meet that 2-month requirement, even if we haven't fully met it by September 30th of this next year, but we have a plan and it's, it's competent, it's likely, whether that then helps us with respect to the audit.
Based on what I'm seeing.
Let me add one thing to that real quick. I think, that 2-month operating reserve is really for, in case of emergencies and things like that. I mean, we're in the middle of an emergency, but, when you really start looking at that 2-month operating, I mean, if we fall short on some of the revenues, state revenues and things like that, that's where we're going to be pulling from, is that 2-month operating reserve. I mean, hopefully we don't. Hopefully we're back to, zero. But when if we were to start falling short on some of those things, that's where we're pulling from. So not only is it a policy, but it's, it's a good practice to have that 2-month operating. But I do understand, as long as we're working toward that, I think we'll be in good shape. I would guess that the state who would have to report to, if we get an audit finding of such, they would accept a plan.
Yeah, I understand. I concur with what you said, but I think we have opportunities to meet that requirement in a reasonable period of time over the next year or two.
Sorry, Kyle, was you going to say something? I apologize.
Yeah, just so I can understand, the surplus and shortfall for that unassigned fund balance at the end of this year is going to be around 441,000. In the budget in the year 2021, which has a shortfall of 245,000. Would that not increase that 265,000? Would that not increase the unfunded balance, assuming no changes?
Well, that's 2022. So, and I don't have a good slide to represent it, but so in this example here, We were estimating, you know, when we started the year, we were, and I'm gonna use a broad number, so don't get on to me if you're using a broad number, but somewhere in the ballpark of $820,000 when we started this year. But with the challenges, you know, we obviously can't take travel expenses. You know, there's some things that we've done through the budget process that we plan on allocating at the end of the year, anything that we have left over. Plus, we took $195,000 and sliced off of that. So when you get to this conversation of, we'll have whatever we have left over from 2021, maybe it's special events, maybe it's salary savings, maybe it's travel and per diem again, we'll have that 441 will be chopped into at somewhat a little bit. And then of course, you know, how we budget for 22, any savings or whatever toward the end of that year. Of course, in this particular case, there won't be, you know, any projected savings in 2022. So that's, I don't know if that answers your question, but it may not be 441 by the time we get done with the end of 21.
Yeah, no, that answered. I'm just overall concerned with that, continued with the 3% assumptions. And I don't want to count C-glass until it hits the bank. So that number sticks out, and I know that long term we've got to make sure we address it.
I know that, you know, and I know the mayor, Lori, yourself were there when we had the two previous council members, and we had a conversation about that fund balance, not only getting you back to the 2-month operating, but hopefully building on that so we could cash fund things or, you know, increase our services. And so that would ultimately be the goal. But I think, you know, what needs to just be acknowledged is that we still have that challenge that we have to meet, you know. And so as we have conversations this coming budget year or beyond into like some strategic planning and things like that, is that we address those shortfalls, not only here, but also in the 2022. We have to start, you know, really having those conversations now about what we want to look like in 2022.
Jeremy, I think that one of the things that has come up in the past is when there is a savings in a line item, it is instead of being put back into fund balance, it's used for something else. And I would encourage you, as we do save money, just like Doug just did in his project, that we would take that and make an actual appropriation and move it into fund balance so that we are continuing to try and prop that up to our best ability instead of just turning it into another expense or turning it into another source for expense. I want to thank you for the ability now to give our non-union employees 3%, which is what they truly was always the precedent, always. And I'm really happy that we are back to that. And I know it is a tough year, but we don't want to balance our budget and have to shortchange any one particular group of people. But to the extent, for instance, that we don't have Tequesta Fest and we don't spend $50-some thousand in smaller events because it just doesn't seem to be needed in that way, the cost. I think that we ought to make a concerted effort to return those funds to the fund balance, that we don't just flip them into something else. As far as again, to Tequesta Fest, I think I'd like to see that on the September agenda for making a decision, finally. The chili cook-off is now is canceled. So the costs that we share, the fencing and whatever, that is no longer going to be there for Tequesta Fest because the chili cook-off has been canceled based on not just, I think, also the, I don't want to speak for Chief True, but it just appears that it wasn't a wise thing to go forward with, especially since we now know the county has stopped all of their recreational activities through the end of the year. To be a part of that. So perhaps we can just take a look at that, and maybe $20,000 there is something that we could look at as going back into fund balance. If we don't spend every penny and every line item, we should be sending it back. We should be sending it back to fund balance.
Yeah, I'd like to echo a couple of points the mayor made. One, again, yeah, the 3% raise for the general fund, the non-union employees, I think was very, very important. And I'm sure they'll be thrilled. And I'm thrilled that, we were able to find a way to do that. The second point that the mayor brings up is this ability to conserve savings. And we had discussions about this a few years back. On one hand, we didn't want to tie the department heads' hands completely, so that if there was $1,000 or $2,000 savings here and they needed something somewhere else, and it was not a significant cost, that they had some discretion to be able to do that. But we said if there were any significant savings, such as the project Doug did, where it was maybe in excess of $5,000 or $10,000, the money might remain within that budget, but we would set up a separate line item in the budget to say, okay, there are savings that have been realized in this amount in this location, and we're going to accumulate these savings, and we'll go through the course of the year. And if at the end of the year we don't need them, it goes back, into the reserve. If during the course of the year something comes up that's of a necessity, we now have a source of funds to be able to go to if something is really truly needed, and it can be pulled from that account regardless of where those excess funds lie. So I would echo what the mayor said. I think we need to have a mechanism like that put into place. We'll leave it to you and you to decide how best to do that. But I think that would be very helpful.
Jeremy, I'm not opposed to the 3% increase to the non-union individuals. What I have an issue with is how it's going against our current policy. Is that something that you're going to look at to correct the policy going forward, or what's the solution there?
So there's no policy on how we give increases to non-union. There is a policy that we have as far as the CPI. And I don't know where I've miscommunicated this, and so I'll take some, I guess, brunt of this. Is that last year we used the CPI in order to give raises and justify those. The CPI in our policy, it doesn't say that's what we're giving to the union or to anybody non-union. The CPI was something that I used, and there was no policy that was necessarily tied to that. We also use the CPI for the PBA and some of the contracts. The ranges move with the CPI, and so there's no policy on how we address the non-union. That was something that I was using at the time to try to at least give them something because of where we were financially. And so I was trying to justify it without just picking a random number, 1.2 or 1.5. It's like we were going to use the CPI. And so there's no specific policy on how we address non-union. And I think that was maybe to the mayor's point a meeting or two ago about trying to come up with a policy on how we deliver that increase to non-union. While they've used the same as CWA in the past, that's not necessarily a policy. That's a practice that's been done the past couple of years.
I appreciate you explaining it to me. So I get that. I would encourage us to definitely have a policy for non-union going forward, so we don't have to go through these type of questions going forward. It's laid out and everyone understands what it is. So there's clarity involved with where everyone can plan and anticipate.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions for Jeremy on the budget?
I do have a question with regards to personnel increase versus operating. That slide towards the top. Yeah, that one. It looks like you've made a big adjustment with regards to operating for the recommended fiscal 2021. Can you dive into that a little bit?
So part of this will be that it excludes the building department, you know, some of the operating costs, but also some of this will reflect the way that we have charged the IT department. You know, some of those costs, if you remember, we brought the IT cost over. You know, we were allocating some of those costs to water fund and stormwater in the building department for those costs. We brought them back over to the general fund, and then we decided we're going to charge it. The admin fee will cover those costs, so that way we weren't doing both. And so that's why you'll see that little bit higher operating cost is because of those expenses in IT.
Was that a change back in 2016, or is this? I mean, what? Because that, to me, I just see a big difference from 16 to now.
Hugh, do you have those numbers handy about what we're doing with IT now and what those costs are?
Yes, those operating costs from 60 to now, the premium tax funds from the police pension plan. That's a good increase there. We're participating in the defined contribution plan. We switched over to the defined benefit plan, and therefore we're able to participate in the 185 funding. That's reflected here as well.
So the 185 comes out of the operating side?
Yes, we have to show it as a pass-through. We get it from the state. We reflect it up above the line in terms of revenue. But we also have to show it going through the police department as an actual benefit.
Right.
And then Hugh, if you don't mind, with the assumptions that you guys have made for the next 5-year period, are you anticipating that to maintain those assumptions that we will not have to increase the millage rate?
That's a general assumption. We think that the property values will remain stable. When you look at the makeup of the commercial versus residential property, the majority of the property residential, and so it is our thought that the pandemic will no doubt affect the commercial properties more, because those properties are valued based on the income approach, which is the ability of the entities to generate income. So we will be seeing some negative impact there, but considering how the Save Our Homes assessment and the residential property values, we think that the net sum will be fairly stable for us from a property tax standpoint. We don't see that much of a significant jolt there.
So 3% is the line to hold in a lot of different areas.
Yeah, that's a conservative. This year, I think it was a 4% increase, but I think overall the 3% may hold depending on how, hopefully next year we'll see a bit of some uptick if, we kind of arrest the pandemic slightly with, some sort of vaccine or what have you. Not to prognosticate too much, but I think hopefully in terms of economic activity, we're hoping next year that to kind of see things taper off. But to address your initial question, property tax revenue, we think it should be fairly stable.
We're hoping, Hugh and I had this conversation, if the Austrade building comes online before January, hopefully that will help keep our rate stable and keep our percentage up there in that 3%, 3 to 4% range, because that's a pretty big project, but it needs to be captured as of January 1. So, hopefully that will help as well.
Well, the other benefit you have too is you've got a lot of people sailing out of the northeastern cities coming down to Florida. And it doesn't seem as though that's going to portend for a reduction in residential property values. If anything, it may help spur them. I agree with you. You want to use a conservative number for purposes of your projections, but there's every reason to hope with a rebounding economy and again, some of the dislocations that are taking place. Sea glass being an example of people coming, I think, primarily out of the Northeast. There's some reason to be optimistic that we'll do a little bit better than the projections, but like you said, you want to be conservative.
Yeah, Frank, I completely agree with your assumptions. And I don't discount, I think that they're very high probability of all those happening. I just think we just got to be very careful to budget with those assumptions. And I know we're not.
Yeah.
And I know you're not suggesting that, but
No.
I think for the long-term budget, we need to stick true to what reality is.
Right. Agreed. Any other questions on the budget? All right, Mary Ann, do you have any comment cards to read?
Mayor, I don't have any comment cards.
All right, then Brad, could you please open the phone lines? Brad?
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. The phone lines are open.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Is there anyone out in our audience here that would like to speak to the fiscal year 2021 budget? Pretty quiet out there, Brad. I think we can probably close the phone lines.
Okay. Mayor, you are good to proceed.
Thank you very much. Council, is there any other discussion items that you would like to tackle?
No, I'll just add real quickly, if you don't mind, that, I'm just impressed the way Jeremy and your team and obviously Hugh and your team and coming together with a solution for a budget and worked hard. I know there's been some sacrifices made to get to this point, and it takes a whole village to get there, and I feel like this has definitely been a team effort. So I appreciate everyone's effort.
Right. Second that for sure. If
Don't
there
forget
isn't any,
Michelle was a big part of that. So I know you mentioned Hugh, but Michelle was great. And I know our department heads made their contributions as well.
yeah, they did. I know that everybody's been working hard on this, and Jeremy, thank you for spearheading that as well. And thank you, Michelle, if you are out there. Well, without any ado, I would say, may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
And a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us this evening.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.